Long ago, in the summer of 1970, a remarkable thing happened in a quiet state park in Clackamas County, Oregon. This stretch of land along the Clackamas River would go down in history as the setting for the one and only rock festival sponsored by a state government. This 5-day party would become a legend and remembered as Vortex 1, a biodegradable festival of life.
I now hereby command you all to disperse. Those that do not disperse will be considered under arrest.
May 1970. National student dissent over Richard Nixon's policy in Vietnam was coming to Portland, Oregon. The president had gone back on his campaign promise to withdraw American troops from Vietnam. Instead, he decides to invade Cambodia and draft 150,000 more young people into the military. Universities across the country explode in protests. Demonstrations become even more intense when 4 students at Kent State University in Ohio are shot and killed by National Guard soldiers. More than 500 colleges find trouble at their doorsteps. Demonstrations, teach-ins, sit-ins, and student strikes disrupt campus routine. Students at Portland State University declare their own strike to protest the war and the Kent State shootings. Students barricade the streets around Portland's park blocks and shut the university down. On May 11th, the tactical squad of the Portland Police Bureau forced the demonstrators out of the park blocks with a demonstration of their own. The tactics that the police use have never been seen before in the city of Portland, and the violence shocks the community. How could this happen here? It's going to be a long, hot summer in the City of Roses.
It was just a bloody afternoon. We called it Bloody Monday. It was on May 11th, 1970, and they just came straight in. They told us to disperse. We did not disperse. We were going to make it a symbolic, gesture. But then, we thought we were going to be arrested.
I now hereby command you all to disperse. Those that do not disperse will be considered under arrest.
But they didn't arrest anybody. They just came in with their clubs. And they call us militants, but these guys are militant. They're coming in with their clubs going, oos, oos, oos. And we're yelling, peace, 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 And finally, the noises just overran into each other, and then they knocked us down. We were circled in the first rank, their arms linked, and then just the full force of them, they knocked us over, and then they started clubbing. My mother, who thought she was going to see me on CBS News get zapped, she sees me getting clubbed, cops attacking me at Portland State just a few miles down from her home. She actually shut her eyes and told my sister, has he been hit yet? Has he been hit yet?
I was right there as the police's attack squad came in with their lockstep and their kind of automatic kind of behavior, and then they started swinging, and I was on a park bench, and when I saw people getting hit and blood coming out, I just started running. So they were hitting people with sticks, big battle sticks. It was very grisly. It was a very frightening thing to see. The police had the park blocks cordoned off too, so they tried to hold us in, but I just ran right through them and just They couldn't catch me. So.
Well, my recollection, I was still going to Portland State part-time in the evening and sometimes in the afternoons. And didn't get involved in all of that, but I remember it was, it was a pretty troublesome thing. There was a lot going on out there in the parks, and it was, I think, pretty well handled by the police bureau. They did as I recall, an awful lot of negotiating and trying to get the people involved and the people in a leadership role in the demonstration and so forth to conform to some standards anyway, willingly. And I think they did do that, but it went on. And as I recall, when the police bureau finally went in to shut things down, they did go in a very strong show of force. In other words, don't show weakness when you go into a situation like that. You try to show your strength. I think that's what they were doing. I know the guy that was in charge of it, and I know he's not a brutal person. He's quite the opposite. And I talked to him a little bit about it over the years. And it did get some bad press, but in 1970, it was pretty hard for the Portland Police Bureau to get good press when they did anything.
Let's recognize these people for what they are. They're not romantic revolutionaries. They're the same thugs and hoodlums that have always plagued the good people.
July 1970. A political thunderstorm is headed for Portland when Richard Nixon announces he will visit the city in August and host a convention of 25,000 members of the American Legion. Anti-war activists from up and down the West Coast are ready for a rematch. They also make plans to visit Portland and disrupt Nixon's convention. One of the main protest groups to emerge in Portland that summer was known as the People's Army Jamboree. With support from Vietnam Veterans Against the War, also known as the VVAW, the People's Army Jamboree turned its attention to the American Legion Convention, scheduled for late August in downtown Portland. This would be a good opportunity for the group to make a statement against the Legion's unconditional support of the Vietnam War.
At the strike, Portland State, we knew that we were all going to organize around, as soon as this was over, organize around the American Legion and their national convention. I don't remember who came up with the name People's Army Jamboree. It was great, though. And what it was sort of was an amalgam of Northwest groups, Oregon and Washington, and the VVAW was, in a sense, to spearhead it. And most of the time we didn't have any squabbles. But when we did have them, we did have them. I remember this lady gave us $10,000, and that's the worst thing you can do to any kind of organization, because then you start fighting like hell to how you're going to spend it. If you want to break up any political group, give them some money. They'll fight over it so bad they'll never speak to each other again.
With the stage set for two opposing political forces to meet in Portland, it did not take Governor Tom McCall long to realize that he had a major problem on his hands. The potential for violence was very real, and Governor McCall did not want to experience a Kent State episode in Oregon.
The story is that the People's Army Jamboree was organized in a response to a rumor that had been circulating in the underground press at the time. The rumor was that there were going to be hordes of people coming to town to demonstrate during the time of the Legionnaires' convention over the Labor Day weekend. So the People's Army Jamboree formed to spearhead that movement in Portland, which would be a violent confrontation. And there were several of us that decided that we didn't think that was a very good response. From our point of view, we wanted to make, real change, and real change is made by positive actions, not by negative reactions. I still don't believe that violence solves problems. It's ineffective.
Oh, it was built up to be a big thing. I mean, the press was raising the specter of fear And we were trying to figure out how to, people from all over the country were claiming they were going to come. We didn't want it. We wanted to do what we thought we'd have to do, but not anybody get hurt.
The specter of fear was rising in Portland. Business owners were boarding up their storefronts as if a hurricane were approaching. If the governor and his staff were going to find a solution to this problem, they were going to have to act fast. Meanwhile, a group called The Family was thinking of alternatives to a confrontation, like that of May 11th's Bloody Monday. Thousands of young people would be arriving in Portland, and they would all need a place to stay. Not all of them would be interested in politics. Many were coming simply to express the need for a new and better lifestyle. How about staging a rock concert? That would attract even more people. What the group needed was a piece of land where everyone could camp out, have fun, and show the American Legion that people can live together in a peaceful and cooperative setting. And that was fine with the People's Army Jamboree. To them, the situation in Portland was looking more and more like an excuse for the police and National Guard to attack political activists.
In the National Guard, some friends of mine that were in the Guard brought back some photographs of bayoneted dummies, and one of them had my name on it, and they all were made to look like hippies, we're thinking, okay, this is look like an ambush, and that's why we told everybody, stay home. We can handle it.
In mid-July, 4 members of the family took a drive from Portland to the state capitol in Salem to ask Governor Tom McCall for a place to stage a rock festival during the same time period as the American Legion Convention. This group of young hippies expected the trip to be a waste of time. Lee Meyer was a member of the group.
I don't remember a whole lot. There were 4 of us that went down. We went down in an Opel Kadett, and we had an appointment with Ed Westerdahl, the lieutenant governor. He received us warmly and was very enthusiastic. And I don't remember the exact timeline, but it was within very short order I got a phone call that we had been given the property and out at McIver Park.
Governor Tom McCall was known as a maverick in the political scene, but even he needed some convincing that this strange plan would work.
Westerdahl, are you crazy?
We came up with a pretty radical approach, which was called Vortex 1, but in essence a legalized pot party. But he was also convinced it was the right thing to do to keep Portland from becoming a battleground.
McCall's press aide, Ron Schmidt, told the governor that Vortex 1 could cost him the election campaign.
He had a swivel chair, and he swiveled around with his back to us, and he just kind of looked up for a minute. We were all waiting for the response, swiveled back and said, "I have just made my decision. I have just committed political suicide. We're going to have Vortex."
Just finally came to the conclusion that handling this right would incidentally be good politics. And handling it wrong because you were too timid and you were shading toward what was safe and conventional and useless, probably.
Breaking the news to the public would be a little tricky. On August 6, 1970, Ed Westerdahl and 2 representatives of the family, Bobby Way and Glenn Swift, appeared at a press conference announcing Vortex 1. So a rock festival was born during that summer of 1970. It was officially promoted as Vortex 1, a biodegradable festival of life. And as far as anyone knew, it was the first state-sanctioned, state-sponsored rock festival in American history. This 5-day festival was free to anyone who wanted to come. And they came by the thousands. Officially, the event was to begin August 28th and go to September 2nd. But many people showed up a week or 2 early.
Yeah, we packed up our bus all the PA gear, all the equipment, and we drove out there, and they were constructing the stage. So we set up our own. We plugged into a barbecue pit outlet and ran some power cords, and the first thing we did, our Frank Dardano, he gets his Marshall stack out, two 200-watt stacks of Marshalls, turns his guitar on and starts playing over this huge river valley, and it was a wonderful experience. And pretty soon we had quite a gathering of our own going. So we had a mini rock festival going before the thing actually happened.
Several versions of maps to the park were available. Law enforcement didn't want anyone getting lost on the way out there. Some maps even had detailed written instructions with helpful advice and suggestions on how to avoid potential problems. The best advice was to just follow the other cars. During the weekend, traffic to McIver Park was backed up for miles. Never before had there been a traffic jam this big in Oregon.
I thought, you know, that's what I want to do. That's where I want to be. I don't want to be in Portland for this. It sounds peaceful out there. This may be a cop-out, but I'm going.
McIver State Park is named after Milo K. McIver, an Oregon State Highway Commissioner from 1950 to 1962. The park included over 800 acres of fields and wooded areas on a series of natural terraces above the Clackamas River. Camping was prohibited at the time, but the governor waived that restriction. This was a perfect setting for an event like Vortex 1. The governor and Ed Westerdahl preferred this park because there was only one way in and one way out. This would be an advantage to law enforcement in case of unruly crowds. Oregon writer Matt Love wrote a book about the festival called The Far Out Story of Vortex 1. He occasionally visits the park to get a feel for what was going on at McIver during that summer of 1970.
Okay, this is where it all happened right here.
A model airplane runway now dominates the field where the stage once stood.
This was where the rock music part and the alcohol was here. The hallucinogens and the mud, the saunas was all down by the river down there. So it was really a story of two festivals. And this road that came in, once they blocked cars off, they had to get their shuttle system going, and they had people shuttle people back and forth, or you had to walk the half-mile in here or to keep going down there.
The model airplane field provided plenty of room for a stage and several thousand spectators. Towards the river, teepees were set up by the Rainbow family to treat bad drug reactions and overdoses. North of this teepee area was the kitchen area, more rainbow teepees, and access to the river. Close to the stage area was the home of the medical tents. In charge of this medical unit was Dr. Cameron Bangs.
The tent were either National Guard or Civil Defense, and they were the 24 by 24 that you see in the MASH unit on the reruns of MASH. And in fact, we put in adhesive tape MASH over our tent. This was when the movie just came out. And we had two of them tied together, which makes a 48-foot long. It was a pretty good tent. We had about 10 cots in there and an area for doing sutures at one end. And then we had two we called overdose or talk-down tents, which had a glowing fire in it, and it was very peaceful. And when we took someone with a bad trip and calmed them down, we would move them into the talk-down tent and put other people with them to watch them.
As a result of his experience at Vortex 1, Dr. Bangs became one of the leading authorities on providing medical services to a large rock festival crowd. He may hold the record for treating the most LSD cases in a single time period.
Vortex was a love festival, and the reason being was that both drugs that were used were love drugs, marijuana and LSD. Our major problem was with LSD overdose, just taking too much. And one of the reasons is that LSD is an extremely concentrated substance, and it takes less than a drop, very little to get high on LSD. And so it's very easy to get a higher dose. I had never seen a bad LSD trip, nor had very many physicians. We had no information as to what to do about it, and we actually learned from the other hippies that were out there. My training says you get someone who's out of control, you give them medicine, you give them shots, you give them sedation. And we did that, and it did not seem to help. And the hippies told us that the reason that they're having this bad trip is just too much input. And so you need to get them quiet and get rid of this input and reassure them that they are not losing their mind and that they will get better.
Dr. Bangs is probably the only person to keep a detailed diary of the event.
From what he told me and from what I can estimate from his diary, I think he was out here about 7 days and virtually never slept and subsisted on beer and corned beef sandwiches. And really one of the fascinating aspects of this story is Dr. Cameron Bangs' medical care. He invented the whole concept of medical care at a large public gathering, particularly where there's going to be drugs involved. He had no playbook, and keeping that diary in the moment, when I came across that, I'd read hundreds of books about the counterculture era, and when I came across this diary, I knew I had something that no one had ever seen before, and it was the best in-the-moment neutral observation of the counterculture that exists in American history. He had just been sitting on it, and he just turned it over to me, and I'm reading this stuff thinking, you gotta be kidding me. And he was out there as a neutral observer, not judging, as some of his medical colleagues did, but just learning at the moment, and then also how it changed him. And so he really is one of the more interesting, if not the most interesting aspect of the story, his role in treating all these people. And, you know, in Bangs, I love it, he goes, if I've got them here, they may come in for an overdose, but if they have a problem, another medical related problem, I'll treat them too. So that was his idea. He said, if some people, these kids are not getting medical care, if I have a chance to deliver some right on the spot, whatever they need, I'm going to do it.
There was an inclusive feel to things at the time, and what I remember doing more than just about anything was walking. I was just walking with my dog and following the different paths and watching the little neighborhoods as they grew up, as the place became more populated. And there were school buses down at one end, a bunch of Jesus freaks, which was kind of a new phenomenon at the time. And that was kind of the far end of things. And then there were, you know, people selling dope, and then there were groups of drinkers, and then there were groups of artists or musicians, and just wandering around and sitting down with people and talking for a while, and then getting up and moving along, and it was like a hippie summer camp.
We're at the lower part of the park now, and down on the banks of the Clackamas River. And up above was where the saunas were, a lot of the camping, the food, the tent circle, the teepee circle that coordinated the festival. The river was where a lot of the action went down. They had a couple saunas. One was a mud sauna, and well, what they would do is they would make a little fire, sprayed some water, brought some water up, and made some mud, and then people would go in the saunas, most of them naked, and then just basically come down and just jump right in the river. And people were just all along these rocks. There was canoeing, there was fishing, there was rafts. There was just action going on down here. And this is far removed. You couldn't even hear the music here from where we are.
For those who wanted to hear the music, there was a rock and roll section up by the stage. Huge speakers carried the music through most of the park. The main complaint from most spectators was that the music wasn't very good. But they couldn't complain too loudly because the price of admission was nothing.
The music was so bad. The music was so lackluster that I remember once the stage had been built, going up there a few times to check out the music and wanting it to be better.
Despite some complaints, there were some good, solid bands at Vortex 1. They showed up at their own expense and played powerful sets that were never recorded and today barely remembered in the hazy memories of Vortex spectators.
There was a lot of people when you put together a function that's free, and there's not a lot of money in it for musicians. So you're going to get a lot of stuff that you might not want to have on stage, but you need to fill that slot. And of course, I think our first time we went on stage was like 3 or 4 in the morning. I remember there was a low fog settling in off the river. They did the lighter deal, and when the lighters came up and everything, you could see completely to the horizon where you could see nothing more, which was, I mean, one of the most awesome experiences I ever had or ever saw. I'd seen it done before, but not completely to the horizon. Plus, we had this, the low clouds had rolled in over this field of people, and you have that light, so it all kind of had a haze to it. And of course, we were probably hazed over ourselves.
We kept hearing rumors that, oh, listen, that's the Jefferson Airplanes. And wow, that group is good. That's the first really good group we've heard. And I was just very disillusioned when Matt Love told me that they weren't out there. This was 35 years later he told me that. I thought for all the time that they...
To me, the music was not the main draw at all. I know it was for some people, but it wasn't for me.
Otherwise, there were no big name bands there. And, I went up and enjoyed the music that was there occasionally, but it wasn't a big draw.
But it didn't matter so much to me, because that, like I said, that wasn't what the real draw was for me, and that wasn't what was happening. What was happening were the people that were there, was the sense of community, the sense of like-minded people united in a common cause. And what that cause would be, I'm not sure. An alternative lifestyle. That would be the common cause.
Whatever the cause was, it attracted tens of thousands of people. Governor McCall and his staff had a cause too, and that was to get potential protesters out to MacIver Park and to keep them there until the Legion convention was over. That would be hard to do if people were hungry.
Serving food was very important to Vortex. They had to keep the people fed out here because a lot of people came out here intending to stay for a day, and then they stayed for like 3 or 4 days. So they wanted to feed them here. And in front of this, they had a huge diesel boiler that was salvaged from I believe a battleship that was trucked out here, and they heated up, they heated these pots, and then volunteers cut up carrots, zucchini, made rice, corn. They put this all together, they cooked it in these pots, they stirred it with canoe paddles, and it was basically a vegetarian mush. And then they just fed the people. There was lines here on people eating on picnic tables here, and then just kind of eating everywhere. But this is where it was a real community effort. The food was donated by local people and also some of the natural food stores in Portland. Discards, canned food probably came out here too. And a lot of people think it was out of philanthropy, but it was in the interest of the local people to keep the kids here and not in the city. And so they wanted to feed them here. And so that's what they did, the vegetarian mush. And there's also some cases, one story, somebody brought out cases and cases of frozen hamburgers. And one of the Vortexers goes, "But we're vegetarians, man."
Meanwhile, back in Portland, the remaining protesters were doing their thing, and the Legionnaires were doing theirs. Both groups managed to express their opinions about the Vietnam War without a violent confrontation. To top it all off, President Nixon never showed up. Spiro Agnew came instead.
The total amount of damage caused by the parade and in Portland, the Legionnaires, was $12. And that was a broken window in Myron Frank.
Many people complained that Governor McCall was being too soft on the activists and that Vortex 1 was a waste of money.
I know all the costs, but this is the only courageous right thing to do. I could just say, let's, as one woman said, and I have her name down, she said, Governor, stand up and shoot them. I said, there might be 1,000 or 10,000 of the children of your neighbors there and your friends there. She said, Governor, stand up and shoot them. And I said, I'll take your name and your quote, and you take mine, and we'll go to the state and see whether our people are reasonable or not. I think they're reasonable enough to say, Governor, we don't want you to subscribe to mass murder.
Back at the park, Oregon State Police and the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office had their hands full managing traffic and the hordes of people coming and going from the festival. Days off and vacations were canceled, and most officers had to work 12-hour shifts. Joe Shobe was the sheriff of Clackamas County, and he didn't like the idea of people breaking the law in his jurisdiction and getting away with it. He also didn't like the fact that Clackamas County was shelling out thousands of dollars in unexpected overtime to keep a 24-hour presence around McIver Park. He later sent the bill to the governor's office, but was never reimbursed. Management of the sheriff's resources at Vortex 1 fell on the shoulders of Shobe's chief deputy, Bill Brooks. He expected the situation to be far worse than it turned out to be.
We expected the worst and got the best. There really, in terms of a real trouble, there really wasn't any. I don't think that the folks that went out in the park to celebrate the Legionnaires convention had any intention of going out there to cause riots or throwing oven cleaner in a cop's face, or that wasn't what they went out there for. They went out for sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Did he just say something about oven cleaner? That's right. Rumor had it that oven cleaner was sold out from all the local stores, and the hippies would use it as a weapon against police.
We had equipment for oven cleaner, which they were using in riots and that, and both to protect our eyes and to, if you got it on your skin.
Turned out to be, everybody's pretty nervous. I mean, we were very heavily armed and, ready for, practically for a war, and we had all of the safety stuff and to combat the oven cleaner or whatever else that was rumored it might be going on, and none of that happened. And from our standpoint, we had it was kind of fun.
The state police had, I believe, 2 teams of riot-trained uniformed officers, which were stationed inside the park, inside the compound of the caretaker, and I don't think anybody ever knew they were there.
There was also a 12-man tactical SWAT team staged down by about a mile from here that were on 24-hour alert. If there was any kind of violence or something like that, they could have been called immediately to come in. Virtually nobody in the park knew that at the time.
The National Guard also had a presence at the park.
They had the Guard was stationed across the river over there. That side, Guard was at the front gate. The National Guard guys, many of them could see what was happening on the other side of the river. There's the great story about one of them wading into the Clackamas River and taking off all his uniform, stripping down naked, tossing his dog tags, and then a bunch of people went up to him and gave him clothes and got him out of the park. I've talked to a couple Guards guys. They got off duty, put on street clothes, and came to Vortex.
Dr. Bangs received help from the National Guard and made Oregon history at the same time when he asked Governor McCall to airlift a patient out of the park.
About the third day out there, a euphoric Tom McCall called us on the radio and says, "Cameron, I think you're doing a wonderful job, and we're very pleased. And the state's 100% behind you, and anything you need, we'll provide." And I thought, well, he said anything we want, let's test him. And said, we need a medevac, a helicopter medevac, to get this girl up to the medical school. And they said, yes, sir, we will get it right out there. And they sent the only helicopter military in the area, this is before the Hueys came back from Vietnam, was, I think it was a Cobra, it was a great giant helicopter from the Idaho National Guard. And so they started flying, and they called us on the radio and said, we will set on the ground 20 seconds and then be gone. So you have that patient ready to put in there. We will not stay longer than 20 seconds. Well, the pilot was afraid that he would be brought down by a beer can. A beer can in a rotor is a very serious injury to a helicopter. So he hovered out of beer can range over the empty circle with all the naked hippies around him. And the pilot leaned over and gave the peace sign. And all the hippies gave him the peace sign. And whoomp, it dropped down, and we loaded her in, and off it went. So that was the first medevac in the state of Oregon.
Dr. Bangs also had at his disposal an all-terrain vehicle donated by a local business. The medical staff used it only one time.
It was so noisy that it disturbed everyone, and we did put one injured in it and drive them back, but we decided that the better part of the environment would be not to use it again, so we didn't.
Saturday, August 28th, there was about 30,000 people on this field. From the park estimates that I have, I went with this official state parks estimate that somehow never made it into the press. So calculating the number of people that they estimated from aerial and their spotters inside, about 100,000 people over about a week period. But that height of that festival was Saturday. It was, pushing 90 degrees. 30,000 people right here on this field, which is a pretty big gathering.
Many people confused the medical tents with the first aid center in the Rainbow Family teepee area. After some initial conflicts, the two areas eventually worked well together. Both treated hundreds of patients with a variety of ailments.
I also hold the physician's world record for treating the most sunburned breasts and penises. Oh, really? Yes. There was a lot of nudity and a lot of sunshine. We saw a lot of fractures, and we saw lots of cut feet and blisters. We saw lacerations. A big part of our activity, the major part, was at night. And during the evening until 1 and 2 and 3, and then it would sort of calm down then, and I can remember crawling into the tent, and so I'd sleep for a couple hours, and then at 5 or 6 they'd come, Dr. Bangs, we got this problem here, and then I'd go back to work. So sleep and eating were not, I have little recollection of either of those.
For those who attended Vortex 1, time passed by like a trip to an exotic summer vacation spot.
I traveled around a lot. During the day, I might have left camp and gone over to the swimming area. I might have left there and gone up to the stage area. From there, I might have tried to get something to eat, back to camp for dinner. That could have taken all day.
I don't remember really having an agenda. They would spend time at the hot tubs, in the saunas every day. I went down there and took a sauna every day, took a dip in the river, spent most of the time in the teepees, went up to listen to music. Always had a great time at night. There was a lot of good energy. And there, didn't take much to have an entertaining time.
The freedom to shed your clothes in public became one of the main attractions of the festival. Nudity was a common sight. Still, it was hard to get used to for some visitors.
You're exposed to a lot being a musician in general, in the business, but being, I guess, 20 years old and then just seeing, the first day probably 30 or 40 naked women, and then it became naked everybody, and some of it was quite disgusting. There were some people who said, please put your clothes back on. But it was quite amazing. It was just absolutely amazing.
A lot of people who were interviewed said they went naked one time in their life in public, and this was it. They just took off their clothes. Some of them found it very liberating, and then they never did it again. But one person told me, you know, it's easy to go naked if you do it for a first time in public.
We'd receive a radio call to contact someone in Estacada or a small store on the highway that there were nude people trying to buy stuff. We made it very plain and clear if they wanted to come into town or be on the roads, they were to wear some clothes.
One of the bands at the festival decided to go on stage and reveal everything.
To go up on stage, you know, totally naked and perform in front of 50,000+ people, which I thought was really bold. And I don't remember even listening to what they played because I think we laughed through the whole thing. I don't remember what they sounded like. I just remember, oh boy, I think I'm getting close to seeing about all there is to see.
Local residents, at first angry about the festival, were now curious and wanted to find out for themselves exactly what was going on in their neighborhood park.
A lot of people from the local areas came, and they came, it was like a Haight-Ashbury tour in a way. It felt like, here's a bunch of people to look at the hippies. And the whole vibe changed. It got very different. A whole lot of us put our clothes back on.
Estacada, Clackamas County kids that came out here, this is the first time they'd had any kind of exposure to the counterculture at all. Here it was in their backyard. There's women walking naked along Springwater Road. There is drug use, there's wine being passed around, and so they got involved in that. For many, I think probably for many people it was their first exposure to this kind of activity that went on, especially around this area.
As the weekend drew to a close, some of the Vortex energy began to fade. Many of the festival goers were just tired and wanted to go home. Some were looking forward to the next festival, maybe a Vortex 2.
Dr. Bangs in his diary records one morning, I think it was Sunday morning. He stayed up all night doing what he did. And he walks out on this field, pretty much where I am right now, and there's all these kids are just splayed out on this field with their sleeping bags, some of them sleeping on logs, on one another, and Bangs describes it as the scene after a hurricane or the morning after a battle. It's one of the great entries that he made, and the stage was right there, and literally it was like they'd been mowed down and they were just exhausted, and somebody was still playing one string of a guitar at like 4 a.m. in the morning.
The end of the weekend set off a mass migration of young people. The number of cars on the road increased dramatically as they spread out across the state. By Tuesday, the party was officially over. Now it was time to clean up the park and for the park's temporary guests to go home.
You know, they cleaned up afterwards, and the park department had crews in there too. But the people that controlled the event down there stepped in and did clean it all up, and that was greatly appreciated.
In a few weeks, the park's grounds were back to normal. Today, there is no evidence that a rock festival ever took place at McIver Park. There are no markers or signs telling visitors what happened here during that wild summer of 1970.
It was really more than we expected in a lot of ways. I mean, but it seemed like what we went down there to do, we thought was a very reasonable thing. You know, it was a plan. You know, it was a plan to divert a disaster, and it was pretty sweet, really. I had a strong feeling that the force was with us.
Lee was really instrumental in putting on a big event, you know, a historical event. You know, for me, it was a party to go to. But, you know, the atmosphere, the spirit of Vortex is something I already had. And so, you know, it wasn't a revelation to me to go out there. I was happy to go out there, had a good time, thought it was great. This was really the first time that young people, counterculture if you call it, worked together with the government to do something, you know, to prevent violence or for whatever reason. I guess the point is that they were working together. And, I mean, they pulled it off. I mean, they pulled off a great event.
Well, you got to remember, I was 25. I thought it was a lot of fun. I'd like to have gone, but the office asked us to please stay out of there when we weren't working. So
it was such a utopian feel. You know, it's what we all wanted back then, to believe that we could live in an alternative way and still be able to make it in the world with, you know, get by with some help from our friends.
And then just various people.
After taping Matt Love at MacIver Park, the camera crew gets ready to leave. Matt invites them to stop at the Viewpoint restaurant near the park.
Let's go. Let's go to the Viewpoint.
He bets the crew that he will be able to find at least one customer that attended Vortex 1. But after 35 years, it's a bet he is almost certain to lose.
So tell me about when you went out to the park.
Well, I went out there with a couple other people or teachers, you know.
Okay. All right.
And I guess maybe it was a study thing. I don't know. We went out to the park and then we just kind of walked around and see what was going on, you know. It was well organized and well run. I can tell you that. And then we walked away and thought, you know, what's the big deal? What's the big deal?
What is the big deal?
There wasn't any big deal, you know.
It may not have seemed like a big deal to some people, but to Tom McCall, it meant that he and his staff could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The festival was over, and the streets of Portland were returning to normal. There would be no more Bloody Mondays while he was in office.
Once Vortex was perceived as a success by the state's newspapers and the media, which was instantaneous, if you read the editorial pages at the time, it was that he pulled this off. Bold decision-making. There was no violence. Portland came out smelling like a rose because they were able to pull off this event and manage the anti-war movement, unlike Chicago.
I think it worked. And you know, what it did and what the people of Portland did really made a message that we don't, you know, this thing is going to stay nonviolent, darn it. You know, we're all working towards that end.
There's no question in my mind that without Vortex, Portland would have been a huge mess. Yeah, so I think it was the right thing to do and a very courageous thing for Governor McCall and a very courageous thing for many of the Clackamas County Sheriff's deputy who were trained to uphold the law, period. And they were flexible enough to yield under these circumstances.
I really think the thing came off very, very well, especially when you go in not knowing what's going to happen and you've never had any experience whatsoever in dealing with that type of event.
You know, one of the things about that time is that I for one was very, very interested in changing the world, and I, you know, as any 20 or 21-year-old with romantic ideals will tell you, they think that they actually can do that. So I was dead sure that we were the answer to of countercultural, blissful awareness of how to live a life, you know, in harmony with the universe, you know, blah, blah, blah.
So many years have passed by since Vortex 1. All the people who were swept up by the vortex have grown older, and Tom McCall has passed away. But the memory is a special one, and hopefully one we can all learn from.
A few years ago, I found some oil that I used to wear, some perfume oil, and I opened it up and sniffed, and all of a sudden I was 19 again. And the sense of possibility that washed over me was what I felt then. the sense of possibility and of anything being doable. If I could dream it, I could do it. And we believed that then. And it was such a gift to have that in my life.
In the end, the story of Vortex 1 was all about solving a problem. The Vietnam War protest continued, but during the summer of 1970, the streets of Portland were peaceful, despite the American Legion Convention. To Governor Tom McCall and Ed Westerdahl, solving problems was part of their job, even though in this case, their solution made for one of the most unusual political decisions in American history. But they made it work, with a little help from their friends.
Vortex mine with me all the time. Don't pass a dime and I don't know why. At Vortex 1, there's always someone to let you know what road you're on. Hit me on the head with blue and red. I got the time if you bring the wine. I'm on the track to a heart attack. Topless woman on a horse's back. Yeah, it's so much fun at Vortex 1. Vortex 1. The word is go on the radio. A new horizon every place I go. Camping on the land, sitting in the sand. Pretty girl smiling in the back of a van. Wish you were here while my mind's still clear. Tom McCall is the man of the year. Nixon riding in a Cadillac. Hawks and doves in a Pontiac. Yeah, it's so much fun at Vortex 1. Vortex 1. Vortex 1. Vortex 1. Vortex mine, hit me on the behind, miss this one, it will be a crime. I don't know just where I've been, better write it down before my head caves in. Last night we called for alcohol, if I knew you then I don't recall. I feel alright with the stars so bright, space and time and a good campsite. Yeah, it's so much fun. Vortex 1.